The Secret Wars are finally happening in the MCU in 2026. But who will make up its roster? Well, let's take a look at some potential candidates. It's just not a Marvel event without Spider-Man in it. Spider-Man is one of Marvel's biggest flagship characters, and he was a big part of the original Secret Wars storyline from 1984, so he seems like an obvious choice. But including him could actually turn out a little bit tricky. Assuming that the film will be based more on the 2015 story, where various worlds of the multiverse collided, he wasn't really one of the main characters in that one. And aside from getting the symbiote, which has been introduced in a completely different way in the MCU, he actually didn't do all that much story-wise in the original event. However, in the MCU, he is among the few characters so far who has personal experience with the concept of multiverses, what with having faced villains from 3 different ones back in Spider-Man No Way Home. So that could give him a nice little role to play as the one to explain some of the multiverse rules to other heroes in a quick and easily understandable way. As we all know, Strange just came out of a movie that dealt entirely with multiverses and how to handle meeting people from them that aren't really like the ones you already know. But the really interesting thing is that the concept of incursions was introduced here, although it was a bit different from the comics. In the 2015 Secret Wars storyline, the term incursion refers to the moment when 2 universes collide with Earth at its center, creating a window of 8 hours where the 2 universes exist harmonically in the same space, after which they then get destroyed. It's quite a bit different from possessing an alternate universe version of yourself, sure, but there's no reason the concept can't be expanded further through Strange in order to justify a big multiversal conflict. I mean, let's be completely honest with ourselves here, it wouldn't exactly be the first time that one of Strange's spells screwed everything up across several universes. And now that I think about it, this movie also introduced another character who could easily find herself playing a big part in everything. I am of course talking about America Chavez. One of the more interesting concepts in the Marvel multiverse has to be the singular dimensions, that is to say realities that have no alternates anywhere else in the multiverse and remain truly unique. America was introduced as one of these unique individuals in the movies, and that is exactly what she was for a long time in the comics. Although since then her backstory has been retconned and we've seen at least one future alternate of her, so who even knows anymore. America is no doubt already going to be a fairly important player in the currently ongoing multiverse saga, what with her ability to freely create multiversal portals, so including her in a battle royale between universes seems like a no-brainer. And if they decide to shake up the rules by introducing alternates of hers as well, it would be a hell of a way to tell the audience that all bets are off, and that from here on out, anything can happen. In a story that goes for as cosmic a scale as the Secret Wars, we need some cosmic level heroes to step up. And that's why we have to talk a bit about Carol Danvers. Ever since her own solo movie, Carol has largely been off doing her own thing in space when she didn't pop back up on Earth to lend a hand in the occasional major conflict. But she is about to get some more focus in the upcoming The Marvels, where she'll be meeting her biggest fan, Kamala Khan. There's really no telling where that whole story is gonna go just yet, but considering that Carol was one of the main characters of the 2015 Secret Wars storyline, it wouldn't be hard to imagine The Marvels building her up for that as well. Or alternatively, we could finally follow up on Monica Rambeau, who is also set to appear in the Marvels after the events of WandaVision gave her superpowers. While she has taken up a number of codenames in the comics, she was Captain Marvel herself at one point, so if the MCU feels the need to retire the Carol Danvers character for whatever reason, we've got ourselves a backup right here. And besides, she was right there in the original story, so why not? I'm sure there's plenty of room for her in the MCU. Ah yes, the Fantastic Four. The first family. The folks that just keep refusing to show up in the MCU. For a couple more years at least. While very little is known so far of the MCU's plans for the heroes that started it all way back in 1961, they are definitely complete shoo-ins for a Secret Wars adaptation. Not only have they always been the kind of heroes to get deeply involved in any sort of cosmic story, but Reed in particular was immensely important to the original Secret Wars, where he was just about the only character who could make any sense of the various machinery found on Battleworld. That is, a planet created by a powerful being known as the Beyonder in order to instigate a massive brawl between the good and evil sides of the Marvel Universe. These guys are also where we start playing with the idea of returning actors. Since Feige is said to be negotiating with every actor who has portrayed any Marvel hero on screen across all film studios, we could actually end up seeing the new meet the old, and see the return of the 2005 Fantastic Four. Or the 2015 ones, which I'm sure won't be confusing in the slightest. I mean, sure, those movies weren't exactly the most well-received at the time, or the most fondly remembered today, but it would still be a nice nod to the world of pre-MCU superhero movies all the same. You can't say Fantastic Four without saying Doctor Doom. I mean, heck, you can barely say Marvel without saying Doctor Doom. It's kind of amazing that the MCU survived this long without him. After all, Victor Von Doom just can't keep his nose out of any cosmic Marvel event, what with his incessant thirst for power. Remember, he basically ended up becoming the lead villain of the original Secret War storyline when he stole the Beyonders' powers, and his desire to conquer is largely what made him try to stop the incursions in the 2015 series as well. Basically, if he thinks he might run out of stuff to rule over, you can bet your bottom dollar that old Iron Mask is gonna get himself involved somehow. Now, the main problem is that there hasn't really yet been a live-action Doctor Doom actor that fans are particularly eager to see return, despite their best efforts in their respective movies, so that makes even the cameo aspect of it a little bit iffy. And with only 1 year between Fantastic Four and Secret Wars on the MCU schedule as things are now, that would mean Doom had to be the main villain of yet another Fantastic Four film in order to introduce him. And I don't know about you, but personally, I really want to see the Four square off against someone else first for a change. Like the Mole Man, perhaps? The Wizard? The Red Ghost? The Puppet Master? No, maybe not the Puppet Master. Speaking of hanger-ons when it comes to the Fantastic Four, we've got to get Namor in on the action now that he's finally been introduced. It seems obvious that he will play some kind of role when the Fantastic Four finally do show up in the MCU, most likely in order to fully ignite his iconic rivalry with Reed Richards. And it's not like the proud king of Atlantis is just gonna sit back and watch if a whole multiversal conflict comes to his doorstep. Granted, he might not end up playing a major role in a Secret Wars kind of story, but the possibilities for interactions with other cameos are absolutely endless. Like, what would happen if Namor already hated the mainline MCU Reed and then met the 2005 and 2015 versions? Just imagine how much enjoyment Namor might get out of having an excuse to smack around any Reed he comes across. Until any version of Sue gets fed up with his crap, that is. Look, I just find the idea of Namor beating the snot out of several Reeds really funny, okay? And of course, we can't have a Secret War story without Iron Man. Now, I can already hear some of you screaming at me. Iron Man? But Tony died defeating Thanos. He can't show back up. That would cheapen his sacrifice. But hey, I never said we couldn't have Secret Wars without Tony. One thing about the original Secret War storyline that might surprise modern readers is the fact that the Iron Man we see in that story is not actually Tony. That was actually Rhodey wearing the Iron Man suit at the time. Now, I'm not saying that MCU Rhodey needs to become the new Iron Man or abandon the War Machine persona, but let's face it. After projects like Black Widow, WandaVision, Hawkeye, and Multiverse of Madness finally gave some action to some of the MCU's underutilized characters, Rhodey has kind of ended up becoming one of the least significant heroes in the whole franchise, and it's time he gets to shine. Of course, we already know that he's going to be the star of the upcoming Armor Wars, and I'm personally guessing he's going to pop up at least a little bit in Ironheart. So including him in Secret Wars could be a great way to fully elevate him to a top tier hero and undo years of just existing to get smacked around so Tony can get pissed at people. Or getting smacked around by Tony, for that matter. Man, Rhodey gets a rough deal in these movies. As the character who started the whole film franchise, Tony was arguably the MCU's leading man. But he wasn't alone. He was joined by Steve Rogers. Having existed ever since the 1940s, Steve is one of the genre's longest-standing characters, and much like Spider-Man, absolutely a flagship character for the entire brand. So when the original Secret War story happened in 1984, it's no wonder that he was right there front and center. But in the MCU, Steve's story wrapped up nicely back in Endgame, and as much as fans would like to see him come back, Chris Evans has moved on from the MCU, so him playing any major part or even just providing a cameo in Secret War seems kind of unlikely. As hilarious as that would be with the Human Torch flying around as well. But it's not like we don't have another Captain America primed and ready to go. Yeah, I have no doubt that Sam will be right there in the middle of the action once the Secret Wars begin. But it wouldn't hurt to really hammer in his role as the new primary Captain America first. Which is where I suspect that New World Order comes in. Before there was an MCU, we did have one other long-running single-continuity superhero movie franchise. And that was the X-Men. Even when the MCU really began to dominate, the X-Men still held on and actually managed to coexist with it for an admirably long time. And while we're certainly all excited to see a new iteration of the X-Men pop up in the MCU, especially now that the existence of mutants has been fully confirmed with Kamala and a few She-Hulk Easter eggs, it would be nice to see some of the old gang show up just one more time. Now, we've already had Charles pop up in the Multiverse of Madness, but I actually had my eyes on a slightly less obvious choice. Because, guess which X-Men got the most focus back in the original Secret Wars? Here's a hint. It wasn't Wolverine. It was Colossus. And wouldn't he just be perfect to see in a Secret Wars movie? Everybody already loves Stefan's take on the Russian powerhouse from the Deadpool movies, and him being there would be a great way for Wade to show up as well to wisecrack about the craziness of the whole event. It's just too good to pass up. Much like Doctor Doom to the Fantastic Four, you just can't say X-Men without saying Magneto. Being super imposing and incredibly powerful, Magneto has always been a character to behold, and one with a lot of moral complexity to boot. Even in the original Secret Wars storyline, he was less of an immediate obvious villain than Doctor Doom, and was more willing to work with the heroes against the Beyonder. And let's be real here, with just how many of the MCU heroes base their powers and abilities on tech, he'd be an absolute nightmare in a fight. Plus, both of his live-action actors are greatly beloved by fans, and it would be amazing to see them return. Granted, Ian McKellen will probably be a bit too long in the tooth by 2026 to go around throwing cars at people, but even a small cameo would be absolutely loved. And if we need to see Magneto in action, we still have Michael Fassbender, and I'm sure he won't mind putting on the helmet one more time and handing some superheroes their butts on a metal tray. As for which one I hope shows up, well...
Both is good.
It might not feel like it right now, but we are currently in the middle of a big MCU story arc, the Multiverse saga. And somewhere behind the scenes we find one of Marvel's biggest baddies, Kang the Conqueror. Kang may have been mostly lurking in the background for the last few years, but he absolutely is about to make sure some nasty business goes down. Not only will he star in the third Ant-Man movie, Quantumania, but we do have a whole movie straight up titled The Kang Dynasty on the horizon. And given how he has his grubby fingers in all timelines and realities, it would certainly be possible for him to be the catalyst that causes the Secret Wars to happen, if the MCU doesn't want to deal with any version of the Beyonder. Or if they do go with the Beyonder, it would be a great humbling moment to see Kang realize that even he can be put out of his league. Besides, Kang is a character defined by the fact that there's always hundreds of versions of him running around at any given time. So it could be a lot of fun to just see a bunch of different versions of him show up, even for the briefest of moments. Maybe even in some of his other identities like Ramatut or Immortus or the Scarlet Centurion. I don't see why not. Oh, Hulk. I love you, but man have you had a rough go at it in the MCU. It's not that the less than jolly green giant hasn't been in a ton of movies. He's been involved in most of the major events and certainly gotten to bash in some heads. But thanks to legal troubles with Universal, his moments in the sun have been somewhat rare, and it would be nice to see him just put his strength to the absolute test. So it's a good thing that Secret Wars is exactly the right place to let him do that. In the original story, one particularly famous moment is when the Molecule Man attempts to kill the Avengers by throwing a mountain on top of them. A mountain that the Hulk then manages to hold up single-handedly, just long enough for Reed to come up with a plan to get the gang out of their predicament. It's a fantastic moment in an already massive story, and seeing this famous cover recreated on the big screen would be an absolute treat. Even if Hulk gets to do absolutely nothing else the whole movie, please at least let us have this one. Few installments in the MCU have been quite as divisive as She-Hulk. The series' much more comedic tone in particular put a wedge in the fan base, even if it was based on a popular run of the comics. And while I'm sure the MCU is not even close to done with Jennifer and that she'll get to show off her more serious chops at a later date, possibly in the upcoming Daredevil series, it really wouldn't hurt for her to take part in a big event. Well, what do you know? She-Hulk was also present way back in the original Secret Wars. Now, to be clear, she was hardly one of the most important characters in it, but she was right there in every battle, duking it out with the various muscleheads on the villain's side, including characters like Titania and the Wrecking Crew. And while those guys, like everyone else in She-Hulk's own show, were portrayed as jokes, maybe Secret Wars could be a way to let them level up a bit and become legitimate threats? Or maybe Jen can face off against some more comics-accurate versions of them. Now that would be a sight to see. Who knows, maybe there's hope for the rest of Emil's support group too. When I say Avengers, who do you think of as the team's leader? Captain America? Tony Stark? Well, in the 80s, around the time the Secret Wars first happened, it was actually neither of them. It was Wasp.
Hi.
Now, the Ant-Man family in the MCU is quite a bit different from the one in the comics, and our current Wasp is not Janet Van Dyne, but rather her daughter Hope, who is still relatively new to the whole superhero thing. But with Quantumania on the way, where she and Scott are going to face off against Kang the Conqueror, it stands to reason that she's going to play a major role in the following Kang Dynasty, which could then lead to her having a much bigger part in Secret Wars, if our earlier theories about Kang being part of the reason everything goes down turns out to hold any water. And if not that, there's always her affair with Magneto to fall back on. Or the time she was hanging out with a lizard. Okay, yeah, maybe not. Secret Wars got weird sometimes, man. Of course, this definitely means that Scott will tag along, but he might want to be careful. Wasp could very well end up outgrowing him in terms of importance. This is nowhere near every character either Secret War story featured or introduced, but it makes for a pretty hefty chunk of them. And I'm sure a roster like this would make many an old superhero fan very, very happy. It certainly would for me. Oh wait, what if the movie introduces Molecule Man Volcana and Spider-Woman?